Hi, this is Steve Dale with the Dale Law Firm, and I'm really excited about this program tonight. I'm excited for a couple of reasons. One is, as we're going to cover, I think the biggest issue we deal with at the Dale Law Firm is where will my child live? And so this is certainly a very relevant program that we're doing. And so part of what we're going to talk about is whether or not the purchase of a home for your developmentally disabled loved one is right for your family, right? Now, our presenters tonight will be, I will do the first part of the program. So I'm Steve Dale. I'm the principal attorney at the Dale Law Firm. We also have one of our new associates. The last program we did was with Diana Quigley, another new associate. And tonight I get to introduce yet another new associate to the Dale Law Firm, Beth Hodis, who has been practicing for 15 years and is an experienced trust and estate attorney. But one of the things that was particularly useful when she joined the firm is that she has a heck of a lot of experience dealing with real estate issues. Okay, so she's going to be covering a lot of the technical issues that we deal with when we're talking about maintaining a home for a person with a developmental disability. The last presenter we have, and just as an introduction, just to show you that nepotism is alive and well, we have my son, Ron Wise, who's a realtor. And even though he's not an expert in disability planning, he is a realtor and he is also has been a contractor for a number of years. And so what he's going to talk about are some of the issues involved if you're looking at purchasing a home, or the other part is if you're looking at converting a home into something accessible, and he'll go through some key things that'll be useful. And I should say before we get started here, our focus is going to be on families with loved ones with developmental disabilities. Much of this um, will be useful for anybody with a disability. The reason that we're focused on developmental disabilities is that we're going to be focused a bit on some of the special programs that regional centers have that can really help with this process. So let's move on with this. One thing, I think any planner knows this. The thing that I hear most from the parents that I work with is the thing that keeps them awake at night is really worrying about where will my child live when I'm gone. And so this is part of what we want to address is, and there's two things we should look at. One is when this is the right thing and the advantages of doing this, but like with everything having to do with disability, everybody's different. Persons with disabilities are different. Situations are different. And so there may be a number of people that are going to watch this, and the decision will be this is not an option for me. But once again, part of being an advocate, part of being a parent for a child with a disability is looking at all the options here and seeing what's right for my situation. Now, one of the Daleisms, as I like to call them, that we have around here, and we're going to demonstrate this in spades, is that disability and simple are two words that seldom go together. In fact, for those of you that are watching this, if you're looking for a simple answer to your loved one's housing needs, you're probably watching the wrong program because there are a lot of complexities that you have to deal with when you're doing this. So as far as the agenda is concerned, we're going to talk about an overview of housing. We're going to talk about key factors about, care, affordability, accessibility. We're going to talk about legal and financial considerations. We'll talk a bit about how public benefits work into this. Then, once again, especially Beth and Ron will be talking a lot about taxation and property transfer rules, and also long-term planning with a special emphasis on ADUs here. Another way to look at this is I'm going to cover an introduction here, a little basics about S&T housing and how to create a housing plan. Beth is going to talk about legal and practical concerns with a heavy emphasis on Prop 19, ADUs, and property taxes. And Ron's going to talk about things to consider when you're looking at a purchase of a home for a person with a disability. I always like to begin illustrating these things with talking about this girl named Kathy. Kathy and I have been together now for 35 years. But this is one of these things to just kind of to illustrate the enormity of the task we're looking at. So just imagine, and for some of you, this may not be hard at all. Imagine that you have a 17-year-old daughter named Kathy. Let's say Kathy has some sort of disability where she's going to need some sort of assistance for the rest of her life. And so the planning for her is going to be very different than planning for a child without a disability. One of the things we're going to look at is, let's say you come and you get your trust done and you get everything in order, and God forbid something happens where you pass away or you and your spouse pass away. And let's say the trust goes into administration. And if Kathy has a normal lifespan, she's supposed to live until she's 87. So this plant could go on for 70 years. Now, whether actuarially your child would likely live for 70 years or 50 years or 30 years or whatever, it's a long period of time. So some of the things we have to look at is that we don't know what benefit rules will be available or their eligibility for the rest of her life. I can guarantee you that the benefit rules are going to change. We don't know if the current support agencies will be there for the rest of her life. And a lot of what we're going to focus on tonight are some of the wonderful programs that come out of the Lanterman system. And I'll tell you, the only reason there is a Lanterman system is because of parents like you who advocate for this and tell their policymakers that this is an important program for my child and don't you dare take that away. But what if the programs weren't around? We don't know what the best choice is for trustees. And we go back to this, and I'm sure Beth will agree with me with this, is that a lot of what we deal with is making sure that there's always a succession of qualified trustees who are going to be there for Kathy's life. And providing appropriate housing for her is going to be a challenge. So let's see how we can meet that challenge. So in the right situation, leaving a home in a special needs trust to provide for the residential needs of a person with any disability, but especially developmental disabilities, can enhance their quality of life and provide a foundation of security for their lifetime. For those of you who know me personally, I was actually a psych nurse for a long period of time and actually worked in community programs and that kind of thing. And I can tell you that a key part of community living, having a safe, predictable place to live for a person with disabilities. And once you get that in place, a lot of other things do fall in place. But in the wrong situation, a poor plan can lead to a design that's doomed to fail, which can lead to eviction and trust wasted on legal funds and uncertainty for the beneficiary, including a risk of homelessness. I have to tell you, we are probably involved in the eviction of somewhere between 1 and 3 people with disabilities a year from the home that they possibly grew up in. And this is one of the things we want to avoid. This is why it is so important that if you're going down this path, once again, to make sure that you have a good housing plan that's going to maximize the chance of this succeeding. So before we begin, let's begin with a housing plan. So what is a housing plan? Part of this with a housing plan is to really explore all the different options and then work through the various things we're going to talk about tonight and figure out how we're going to meet all these challenges. So when we start looking at this and our framework here, even before we work on the plan, is we want to explore and evaluate all the housing alternatives. We want to identify the core needs of the beneficiary. Once again, one thing about persons with disabilities is that they're all individuals. I know for Beth and I at the law firm, if everybody had the same need and they had the same reasons and all that, resources, boy, wouldn't our jobs be so much easier. But that's not how it works. These are individuals, and there's a number of things going on here. And we want to make sure that what's done is specific to the beneficiary's needs. We want to assist the physical environment needs, including accessibility of the home and neighborhood suitability. Ron will cover a lot of that in his portion of the presentation. We want to calculate ongoing costs and management needs, including maintenance and operation and property management. Depending on the beneficiary, if they need a lot of assistance, we really need to look at caregiver expenses here. And that's part of what I'm going to cover is some of the options through the regional center to meet those needs. We want to make sure that we have a sustainable funding strategy. Once again, this option is not inexpensive. And what you want to do is make sure that we have enough funding to be able to make sure that the property is kept up, make sure the property taxes are paid, and also make sure that we're building a foundation that's going to build the quality of life, not just a roof over the beneficiary's head. We want to consider property tax and capital gains tax issues. Of particular importance that Beth is going to cover is Prop 19 and how that really can affect planning. And the last thing we want to cover, and notice it's the last thing, is once we get that all worked out, we want to design and structure a special needs trust that's going to help meet all those objectives. So let's plow through this. As far as exploring and evaluating all housing alternatives, it's all about choices. It's always about choices. So what we want to do is compare staying in the family home or purchasing a new home or building an ADU or renting or joining a supported living arrangement, which could be a group home, could be any number of things. There isn't just one single option. There's a multitude of options, and you really do need to consider all of these things. You need to assess the feasibility of shared housing, duplex models, or group homes. And so there's so many possibilities, and we're going to try to cover as much as we can. We want to identify the core needs of the beneficiary and involve the person with the disability or their current or future caregivers in the planning. And I can't tell you how important that is with this. Consider the physical, sensory, behavioral, or emotional needs while we're doing this, and identify preferences around independence, social inclusion, and routine stability. I'll tell you, and I'll try to keep this short, but kind of a funny, maybe not so funny story is I worked on a case. I was so proud of this case, and I worked with the parent putting this together. And what we did is we designed a plan with that was going to hold a duplex, and we had plenty of funding, and we designed this thing to make it fully accessible for our beneficiary, and then have another unit so that we could generate some income, and also there would be someone around. It was a wonderful plan. And so when the parent passed away, we went to get everything in order. And then I get a phone call from the beneficiary, and the beneficiary says, Mr. Dale, do I have to live in this house? I want to live in a group home with my friends. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we went through all of this, putting this together. And as it turns out, the person we did it for didn't really want to do this, wanted to live in a group home with his friends. By the way, he's living in a group home with his friends, and the property was sold, and he's doing quite well. But the moral of that story is that if there are key people that are going to be involved in this, include them in the plan here and get their input. We want to assess the physical environment needs, including accessibility of the home. Oftentimes, not always, it may be very desirable to have a one-level layout or have elevator access. If we have issues having to do with accessibility, if the person is in a wheelchair or might in the future need a wheelchair, are the hallways wide enough? Do we have ramps, or how hard is it going to be to put in ramps? And do we have ADA compliant bathrooms? In many cases, and Ron's going to cover that, if you're starting off with a property that meets those needs, isn't that nice? It's a lot harder to take, a standard property and make it ADA compliant, and that's going to be something you're going to want to consider. If there are special issues, if there's an accessible vehicle. We were once involved in a case where somebody put together a garage to put the wheelchair van in so the beneficiary wouldn't have to sit out in the rain to get them in and out. Unfortunately, whoever designed the garage didn't leave enough room for the ramp to come out, which meant the beneficiary had to get out in the rain before they could put the van in the garage. We want to avoid that kind of thing. We want to also look at safety during emergency situations. And, with what's been going on with wildfires and that kind of thing, you need to really think, with the location I chose, what if there's a wildfire? What if there's an earthquake? Are we going to have a way to get in and out? If we're dependent on a respirator, are we going to have electricity? That kind of thing. So many things to think about. We want to look at the neighborhood suitability. Ideally, we're looking at quiet and a low crime community, right? There may be something that is desirable because of the cost, but if you're doing that at the expense of being in a place that's unsafe, and persons with disabilities are oftentimes so much more vulnerable than the rest of us, that's something we should really consider. Proximity to services and day programs and public transportation, once again, can be so important here, so that the person isn't just living in the community, they can be part of the community and participate here, not only in programs, but churches and whatever it is that brings them joy. And is it a supportive neighborhood? And is it a place where there's walkability? Now, even in a wheelchair, walkability means, is it something that you would feel good walking around the block, or is it something that you would be afraid for your life? One of the things you have to look at when you're doing this is maintenance and operations. And once again, I'm just going to touch on this because Ron's going to cover a lot of this. But we need to plan for long-term costs, for repairs, for landscaping, for property taxes and insurance. When we have cases that go bad, it's usually because there's not enough money for the maintenance and there's not enough money for the property taxes. And once again, you need to really think that through. As far as the property management, determine if a family member is going to manage it. Are you going to have a professional manager, or is there going to be a nonprofit that will oversee the home? Okay. Also, you need to identify backup managers if the first plan fails. You need to build a strategy for funding, and that's going to include, your public benefits, your SSI and SSDI. But I'm here to tell you that if your loved one is on SSI and getting $1,250 a month, we need more money, right? So you really cannot do this on this amount of funds. You might be in a situation where you can count on rental income, and that may be a plus, or it might not be, depending on the situation. This is a situation where inheritances and family gifts might be useful. Also in this, and we have lots of programs on this, you may be looking at covering the cost through life insurance or retirement assets designated to the Special Needs Trust. We have a number of programs on the Secure Act and we'll make sure that folks that are watching this will have links to various programs. Also, for the life insurance, just something to touch on. Many of the families we work with will tend to be younger than most estate planning offices. And this is an area where a cheap term insurance plan may be very affordable and may at least cover a gap of 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's something you might look at. Obviously, I'm not a financial professional, but these are things that you can consider. Caregiving programs with this, and once again, we're just going to touch on this, but since I'm focused tonight on developmental disabilities, the core of our system in California is the Lanterman Act, which is overseen by the Department of Disability Services. DDS covers, and I think this number is low, supports more than 400,000 Californians with developmental disabilities, which includes cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, autism, epilepsy, and related conditions. There's a lot of folks they cover. The budget is very large, but housing is high on their list of priorities. So what I want to do is go through a few of the key organizations when you're looking to put a housing program together. Now, these are all programs of the regional center, and through the regional center, all services are done by the individualized program plan or the IPP. If it's not in the IPP, it doesn't exist. It's all about the IPP. And we have a program called Keep the Lanterman Promise that, once again, we'll make sure we include as a resource that teaches you about how to best maximize the IPP. In the planning process, it's a gathering information to determine the goals of the person with the disabilities, their capabilities, their strengths, their preferences, their barriers, their concerns, their problems with that. Out of that analysis, out of that assessment, there's a review of resources, both public and generic, and private, and to establish what sources may be available to help address and identify needs. And then the regional center, after they assess those resources, because regional centers are always the payer of last resort, its job is to assess what the need is and then provide those supports through the IPP. And the way the Lanterman Act is, as it is today, is not that anything goes, but whatever it takes to meet those resources, the regional center is obligated to do it. The Lanterman system is an entitlement. And so that's very important when we're doing these programs. Now, the first program, and this is not a regional center program, but remember I told you that the regional center is a program of last resort, is in-home support services. In-home support services is a program for Medi-Cal recipients, which is our Medicaid program in California, and it provides personal care and domestic services to persons who are aged, blind, or disabled who live in their home. This concept of living in their home is going to come up over and over again. IHSS is provided to those who otherwise might be placed in an out-of-home care facility, but who can safely remain in their home if IHSS services are received. Now, they may qualify for up to 283 hours a month, dependent of their needs. So when we're talking about care services, that is usually the foundational program. Now, if we've got somebody who needs 24-hour care, if you do the math, 283 hours is not 24-hour care. So where are we going to get the care? Well, there's a couple of things we look at. One is the Independent Living Skills Program. And the purpose of the Independent Living Services Program is to increase the independence of an adult with a disability by providing practical, community-based instruction that helps them function in their natural environment, in their family home or transitional setting or whatever. And so for the first 2 years, you can get up to 35 hours a month of instruction. And then after that, you can get up to 15 hours of instruction. The way I think about it is, let's say we're focused on Kathy, and let's say that with a little help, Kathy can learn how to make her own meals. So it might be part of the ILS program that we're going to teach Kathy how to make her own meals so she can be more independent. Part of this is their focus can be involved in daily living skills like cooking and cleaning, learn financial management, which is becoming more important. So learning how to manage money and do things like cash checks, maybe manage an able account. Mobility, using public transportation independently. This is a huge focus of ILS planning, and certainly works within our plan. Learn personal hygiene, self-advocacy and safety, and also learn how to use community services, including the use of health resources, community services, and recreation participation. It's all about helping the beneficiary learn how to live in the community. Now, a huge program when we're talking about housing is supported living services. Supported living services is somewhat like ILS, but is for providing the client on who might require ongoing training. And this is actually providing them with actual supports to live in their home. So living in their own home, I'm going to cover that a little bit. It can include an ADU. And this is one of the reasons why Beth is going to spend a fair amount of time about ADUs. It can also include any number of things. The duration of the services are provided based on an ongoing need. And so we have many clients that have very robust supported living services programs that are going to go on forever. The supports are available as often and for as long as needed based on the availability of natural, generic, and other supports. The number of training and support hours will vary and can be provided up to 24 hours a day. We have many, many, many clients at the Dale Law Firm that between the IHSS and the and the SLS are getting 24 hours a day care. This is very unique to California, and this is why this works. Now, when we're talking about living in one's own home, there's a number of things we're looking at. So, part of this is the goal is for the person with the disability to have some sort of legal control, even though in the cases we're going to talk about, they won't own it over their residence. Flexibility about housing types, which includes apartments, condominiums, houses, townhouses, or ADUs. Once again, the goal is for them to have freedom and autonomy and to be able to make daily decisions for themselves and to manage their personal lifestyles as much as they can. This has to be tailored to the individual, right? And the other focus is, and this is the real power of community living and deinstitutionalization, is not just leaving large institutions to be in isolated homes. It's about community integration and making sure that the person is part of the community. It also involves customized support, and services and supports are tailored to the individual and developed and delivered directly in person, in the person's own home, according to the IPP. So to get this, you cannot be living directly under your parents' roof. You need to be living in a separate home. But the definition of what that is actually rather broad. So the last thing I'm going to cover before I turn this over to Beth is just to touch on elements of the special needs trust and how it affects housing. So first off, just to touch on this, all a trust is a contract to control property for the benefit of a beneficiary to meet some objective. A special needs trust is specially drafted so the trust assets are not considered to be an available resource in calculating their disabled person's eligibility for needs-based benefits. Going back to this, that a trust is a contract to control property for the benefit of a person. In this case, our focus is going to be to tweak this contract to make sure that everything that is necessary to operate that home and make sure that the beneficiary, who is the resident in that home, is leading a quality of life and a safe life. That's what we're going to be doing with that trust, to tweak it to make sure that it meets our objectives. Now, by the way, you'll see this up there. Oftentimes in our programs, you see a thing that says POMS SIO 1120.200. These are directives to eligibility workers about how to handle different situations that has to do with SSI and related things. So the manual tells the workers is that the trustee of a special needs trust, if they hold title to a home for a beneficiary, that the house would not be a resource to the beneficiary. And this is really important. We'll be covering this later. It also wouldn't be a resource if for some reason, let's say the house had to be sold, or maybe we had to do a buy down or something along that line here. And so this is one of the reasons a special needs trust becomes such a good choice for a person with a disability, even when the person has capacity. A couple of issues touching on this really quick. Why do we favor special needs trusts? One, if we have a capacity issue, so let's say your person lacks capacity or maybe loses capacity. If it's in a third party trust, it's not going to affect the ownership of the house and it's not going to come under court supervision. Whereas if it was owned directly by the beneficiary, and I should mention that on SSI and on Medi-Cal and related programs, a person can own the residence they live in and still stay eligible. I will tell you, we rarely suggest you do this for the reasons we're going through here. So if the property in that case was owned by the individual, it could require a conservatorship of the estate, which means you have lawyers and judges that are overseeing this property. And I'm just telling you, it's going to be expensive and that's not the way you want to go. If there's a home sale, as we said, the excess funds are going to become part of the trust and can be used for whatever the beneficiary's needs are. Whereas if it's owned by the beneficiary directly, it can be used for a replacement home. But if it's not used for a replacement home within 6 months, or if there's money left over after the replacement home, you're going to have to figure out what to do with it. Probably a self-settled trust, something along that line. For Medi-Cal recovery, there's no issue about Medi-Cal recovery in an estate planning trust because the beneficiary had the beneficial use of it, but they didn't own it. Whereas if they owned it individually, it may be an issue for any Medi-Cal they use after the age of 55, unless it's held in a living trust. A couple last things before we turn this over is if you're trying to determine if this is right for you, ensure that the trust has sound management system and a line of succession at least as long as the occupant, the beneficiary, is alive. Now, once again, this isn't a program on trusteeship. And for instance, in the program that Diana and I did last month, we got deep into the woods about trustee choices. But the trustees you might look at would be possibly use of family members, a private fiduciary, or corporate trustee, and in some cases, a pooled trust. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. And so I want to introduce Beth Hodes, who, once again, I'll ask her to give a little bit of information about herself, but she's going to talk about the key issues to address when you're looking at the purchase of a home.
Good evening. As Steve said, my name is Beth Hodes. I have been practicing for 15 years. I spent quite a bit of time working as a hearing officer for property tax appeals. And so I've seen a lot of the problems that routinely occur regarding property tax. And part of the reason, as Steve pointed out many times, what's critical in making the decision about the housing for your disabled loved one is a plan, a well thought out plan. And oftentimes what I find is that the family will become focused on how many bedrooms, what do we want for the floor. It's issues regarding the space that you'll be creating for your loved one. But in that process, oftentimes tax issues are overlooked and it can be quite detrimental. I'm going to be spending some time on property tax capital gains tax, and ADU options. As Steve pointed out, there are a multitude of options, and Ron will be going into these in quite a bit of detail. You can't, the child could live in the parent's home with the parent. The family could purchase a home for the adult child. There could be a purchase of a duplex, or perhaps a gifting of a duplex. There's constructing an ADU, there's Section 8 housing, and rental units are an option. For example, with constructing an ADU, issues to focus on are proximity to support, cost of construction versus the cost of remodeling, designing for accessibility, and multi-generational benefits. One of the beauties about ADUs is what Steve pointed out. You're not living under your parents' roof, and that entitles the individual to significant support services. And although they're not living under their parents' roof, they are in familiar environs with family. It's a wonderful way to support growing independence and quality of life. When one is evaluating these options, they'll certainly want to speak with a real estate professional, a contractor. There's a need to spend a significant amount to focus on accessibility upgrades. How expensive will they be? And then the cost of long-term maintenance and planning. So the cost and funding comparison between purchasing a new property, remodeling an existing property, constructing an ADU, evaluating cash flow for mortgage costs, tax and maintenance costs, and then considering HUD programs. At the end of 2020, California voters passed a constitutional amendment which changed the way property tax is assessed in the state of California. And effective February of 2021, there was a significant diminishment in properties that qualify for an exclusion from reassessment when transferred from a parent to a child. So formally, whether one's residence and any other property they owned could be transferred to a child without a reassessment. And that transfer worked in the opposite direction as well. A child could transfer property to a parent. But effective February of 2021, properties that qualify for an exclusion to reassessment on ownership transfer are now limited to the family home and the family farm. And so that duplex that you own, that single family home that you rent out, you're no longer able to transfer those properties to your children and without their and allowing them to maintain the assessed value that you enjoyed. So the way Proposition 19 works is that there's an exclusion on reassessment for the family home and farm with conditions. What are those conditions? Well, first, the definition of a family home. The family home must be the principal residence of the transferor. That would be the parent. It's defined as a dwelling, which must be the person's true, fixed, and permanent home and principal establishment to which he or she, whenever absent, intends to return. So in state presence, vehicle registration, voter registration, bank accounts, and state income tax filings are among the matters to be considered in determining residency, which for exemption purposes is equivalent to domicile. You can only have one principal residence. You can only, that principal, one of the definitions of a property that, or one of the factors that makes a home a principal residence is that it's eligible for the homeowners or disabled veterans exemption. To be able to transfer your principal residence to your child and not have that property experience a reassessment to fair market value, that property must be your principal residence. And for it to be your principal residence, it must be eligible for the homeowners or disabled veterans exemption. Once you transfer that home, that principal residence to your child has to reside within 1 year of the transfer in the home. It must be your child's principal residence, and they must continue to occupy the home for as long as they hope to maintain that lower your assessed value. And the child must file for the homeowners or disabled veterans exemption within 1 year of transfer. So principal residence, and there can only be one, is a key issue in maintaining a preferred assessed value. Examples of the Proposition 19 transfer are parent to a child's special needs trust following the parent's death, parent to a child's trust before the parent's death, and then one of the issues that needs to be taken into consideration is calculation of the new tax basis for the home. One of the restrictions on Proposition 19 is that there's a limit to the value of the property that can be transferred with this parent-child exclusion in place. And it's $1 million plus the assessed value of the property. If that number is less than the fair market value of the property at the time of the transfer, then there will be a reassessment on that portion that exceeds the $1 million plus the assessed value of the parent. So the property must be the parent's principal residence. There's a restriction on the value that can be transferred without incurring any additional assessment. And the way you determine whether there's whether the value of the property exceeds the amount that can be transferred without a partial reassessment is to calculate the new tax basis. So again, these are the key eligibility criteria for Proposition 19 eligibility on a parent-to-child transfer. Principal residence of both the transferor and the transferee must be eligible for the homeowners or veterans exemption prior to transfer, value limit on value that can be excluded from reassessment, and quite significantly, there's a limitation on sibling transfers. The exclusion from reassessment only applies to parent-to-child transfer, child to parent, grandparent to grandchild, and grandchild to grandparent. It does not apply to transfers between siblings. It's very important to keep that in mind if you are planning on potentially transferring a home to siblings, because the exclusion from reassessment can be very quickly lost. So in addition to property tax, we need to consider capital gains tax. And the reason for that is if property is inherited, then there is a step up in basis. If property is gifted, there's a carryover basis, and the tax implications are huge. Cost basis is the your cost for purchasing an asset. Fair market value is the value of that property, either with appreciation over a period of years, or it may depreciate, but in California, that's unlikely. So if you gift property, that has appreciated, meaning you transfer it while you are still alive, the recipient of that gift takes your basis in the property. And so if the property value has appreciated significantly, when the new owner, your child, for example, that you've gifted the property to, sells the property, they are going to be liable for all of the capital gains that have accrued since you first bought the property. If one inherits property, if you leave it, if the transfer occurs after death, then the recipient of that property receives a step up in basis to fair market value at the time of death. So there's capital gains tax is something to consider when you are transferring, when you're considering gifting appreciated property to a child. And it's also something to consider the benefit of inheriting property provides the recipient with a step up in basis. And so they will be, the recipient of that property will be liable for capital gains that accrue after they take ownership, but they are not liable for any capital gains that occurred prior to the transfer. So here's, I just wanted to quickly go through 3 scenarios with you that show how property tax and capital gains tax can interact, or the need to consider both of them when considering transferring a piece of a home or a piece of income property, or buying a home for a disabled family member. So if you paid $250,000 for a piece of property, and today it's worth $1 million, and you leave it to your child at death, they will benefit from a step up in basis, so that their basis in the property is now the fair market value, or $1 million. Compare that to gifting the property to your child prior to death. They will take your basis in the property, which is $250,000, and when they sell the property, they will be liable for the $750,000 gain that occurred during your ownership, and any tax on any additional gain that occurs during the time that they own the property. So let's look at a parent passing the residence to their child's special needs trust on the parent's death. John is a single parent of Alan who has a significant developmental disability. John has always been concerned about the residential needs of Alan, and he created an estate plan which includes passing assets for the benefit of Alan in a special needs trust upon his death. It is expected that Alan will likely live with John in the family home for the rest of his life. So when John passes away, the property tax on the home is based on a valuation of $200,000, but the fair market value is $1.3 million. Since the home was John's resident, the parent's resident, and will also be the residence of the child, the transfer to the special needs trust will qualify for the parent-to-child exclusion under Proposition 19. So what that means is the Proposition 19 exclusion from reassessment for parent-to-child transfer is applicable here, because it was John's primary residence, and it will also be Alan's primary residence. Now, because the fair market value of the home at the time of John's death likely to the fair market value is greater than 1 million plus the assessed value, which is $200,000. So the total would be 1.2 million. And we said the fair market value was 1.3 million. So 1.3 million is greater than 1.2 million. The difference between the two is 100,000. And so you add that 100,000 to the assessed value, the factored base year value, and the new assessed value for the child who will now, the beneficiary of the trust that is now holding this home will be $300,000, as opposed to, what did we say? It was fair market value is 1.3. So it likely will make it possible for Alan to continue to live in his father's former home. And because this was a transfer on death, there's a step up in basis to 1.3 million. Now the home is in Alan's special needs trust, and if it becomes necessary to sell the home, the gain that will be the potential gain on sale will be much smaller than the gain that has occurred since the father originally bought the property. And so, and because it's a parent to child transfer at death, there's a step up in basis to fair market value. Scenario 2 is a home purchased for a child with a disability that's in a trust, and that home is not the parent's primary residence. Judy purchased for her child, Jacob and Irene have a daughter named Judy. 10 years ago, they purchased a condo for her, which they have adapted for her needs, with the intention of passing it to her special needs trust when the second of them passes as her residence. The property has a property tax base of $200,000 and a present market value of $600,000. So the question is, when Jacob and Irene pass and the condo is transferred to Judy's special needs trust, will Proposition 19 apply? And because this is a home that her parents purchased for her, it was not the parent's primary residence, Proposition 19 does not apply. And so the condo will be reassessed to fair market value on the transfer to the, Judy's special needs trust. And because this is a transfer on death, there will be a step up in basis for capital gains purposes, but the property will be reassessed to full market value. So what about rental property? Oftentimes there's a feeling that we'll take a highly appreciated piece of rental property and we'll transfer that to the child's trust, their special needs trust on our death. And this will provide them with some financial security and supplemental income, and could appear to be a good solution. The trustee, if there is income property in a special needs trust, a third-party special needs trust, the trustee may use the property income to pay for services and items that enhance the beneficiary's quality of life. There are estate planning advantages. You avoid a Medi-Cal estate recovery upon the beneficiary's death because it's in a third-party special needs trust. Provides for increased flexibility when selling the property, since the assets are maintained within the trust, and so you're not faced with a 6-month time limit for reinvesting the funds. The downside of transferring income property to a third-party special needs trust, rent control is a big one. The trustee is often being asked to act as a landlord, and managing income-producing property requires expertise, and the high management costs can rapidly deplete trust resources. One of the biggest reasons not to do this is that there's no Proposition 19 exclusion from property tax reassessment because the property being transferred is not the parent's principal residence. Now, if you're transferring a residence, a duplex, where one of the units was the principal residence of the parents, then there's a special, assessor essentially bifurcates the property and reassesses the unit that was not the principal residence to fair market. The assessed value is the fair market value of the property, while the unit that was the principal residence of the parents that will be covered by Proposition 19. Another downside is that the trustee's discretion to decide when and how to use the trust funds can limit the beneficiary's control over income generated by the property. There are tax issues. Undistributed income earned by the special needs trust can be subject to higher tax rates. And there are liability issues. There are inherent risks and potentials for lawsuits associated with income property. So this is the final scenario: the transfer of the parent's residence and rental property to the child's special needs trust. Essentially, this is what the scenario that I just described with the duplex, where one unit is occupied by the parents and the other unit is a rental unit. The assessor will bifurcate the property, reassess the rental unit to fair market value, and apply the Proposition 19 exclusion to reassessment to the unit that was the principal residence of the parents. Families that are considering transferring a principal residence with the values in excess of $1 million, which is quite common today in California. Parents that are considering transferring income producing property to a child, and parents who plan on leaving, if you're planning on leaving a residence, transferring a residence that you purchased for a child to them on your death, you should definitely consider seeking counsel to evaluate your best options. It can be rather complicated. So ADUs come in a variety of flavors. They are, an ADU is defined as a complete independent living facility for one or more persons, which has its own living, sleeping, cooking, and sanitation facilities. And it's a self-contained home on the same property as a single-family home or a multifamily residence. There are different types of ADUs. There's an attached ADU, which would be physically connected to the primary dwelling, often through conversions of existing spaces like garages or basements. And then there are detached ADUs, standalone structures built separately from the main house. And then there are junior accessory dwelling units, which are smaller in size compared to traditional ADUs and are typically created by converting existing spaces within the primary dwelling. They must have a separate entrance and basic living facilities, but they can share sanitation facilities with the main residence. Now, there are size restrictions on ADUs. The maximum size for a detached ADU is 1,200 square feet. So they're not large. And then there's an attached ADU, which the size is limited to the smaller of 50% of the primary dwelling's living area or 1,200 square feet. There's a minimum size that it cannot be less than 850 square feet for a one-bedroom ADU or 1,000 square feet for a two-bedroom ADU. There are a number of significant benefits of considering ADUs as housing for a loved one with a developmental disability. They're continuing to live in an area they're familiar with, they have family support. It does not create serious change all at once, and it seems to it provides for privacy and a sense of independence, and at the same time knowing that there's always support available. Steve mentioned the SLS benefits from the regional center. Because living in an ADU is not considered living under your parents' roof, individual with a disability living in an ADU would be eligible for SLS benefits. The building costs associated with ADUs are significantly less than oftentimes than associated with remodeling a home, adding on rooms, and there are special provisions for accelerating the permit process for ADU construction. So it's definitely something to consider. And of course, because the individual is living with the community that they've lived with, they continue to be integrated in the community. There are accessibility issues and recommendations for ADUs. Emergency planning and evacuation is definitely something to consider when deciding on a layout. Because ADU construction is considered new construction, or it does require a building permit, and consequently there will be a property tax increase as a consequence of the construction that will be based on the fair market value of the ADU. So one thing to consider in looking at ADUs, there are pre-approved ADU plans that are offered by some jurisdictions, and that can definitely provide some creative planning, and also provide some information about costs that are likely to be incurred. There's also a Cal HFA ADU grant program, which can help offset costs. In evaluating the options for your loved one in terms of housing, there's no one size that fits all solution. As Steve said earlier, you need to align the housing with the care, financial, and legal needs of the individual. There's a lot of planning that goes into a successful long-term plan. Relying on professional advisors is wise, and be realistic about the amount of time this will take, and an investment that will lead to richer life for your loved one. Thank you. Ron is going to talk now about his expertise in evaluating property from a salesperson and contractor's perspective.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. My name is Ron Weiss. I have 40 years experience in the building trades, and I have 20 years of experience as a home improvement specialist and am a licensed general contractor. One of the benefits of working with me is because of being a real estate agent who has been involved in renovation projects, and general contracting can be a huge asset for families with adult child with disabilities. I can address both housing search and customization needs for accessibility, safety, and long-term independence. Here are some examples of what I can uniquely offer. A tailored home search. Identify homes with good accessibility, spot properties with ADU potential, evaluate neighborhoods for proximity to medical services, therapy centers, transportation, and support of community resources, and help secure financial special financing. I could provide immediate feasibility by doing on-site evaluations during showings to estimate costs or scope of renovations, quick remodeling feasibility reports, basically on site, what, how much is it going to cost a widen the door or install a ramp here. Those are things I could estimate on the spot. And I could assess the structural integrity for future modifications and adaptations, like ceiling lifts, roll-in showers, or widened doorways. Custom accessibility renovations. I can modify existing homes for full ADA compliance, including ramps, railings, grab bars, and lower countertops. Design safe environments like non-slip flooring, smart home tech, and friendly sensory spaces. Build an attached or detached ADU specifically designed for a child's needs. So they have their private space, but they're close to home, as Beth was talking about. Plan for future needs, aging in place, mobility changes, and adaptations over time. Provide long-term support, help housing for evolving needs, ongoing maintenance and upgrades, and property value retention. When I do home searches, I really like to zero in and get to know my clients. So I like to make a specific checklist, and the criteria for each individual is different. So some of the things we look at is neighborhood, what the crime rate's like. Is it there well lit streets? Is there a fence yard that is needed? Doors and windows secured appropriately, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, all in working order. Is it a single family home or elevator access if multi-level? Wide doorways and hallways, wheelchairs and walker access. Accessible bathrooms, walk-in shower, grab bars, raised toilet seats. These are all things I'm looking at while I'm touring homes. Are there minimal stairs or ramps needed? Open layout for easier navigation, and that is a layout that most everybody likes anyway. Quiet neighborhood, low traffic, noise level. What's the lighting like? Can it be dimmed or adjusted? Is there space for a sensory or a calming room? Is the HVAC system operating quietly? Kitchen layout support independent or semi-independent use. Laundry machines accessible and easy to operate. Bedroom locations offer privacy and safety. Smart home tech for routine reminders or emergency alerts. Is the home close to public transportation? Is there nearby family or caregiver support? What's the proximity to medical care providers? That's extremely important. Easy access to grocery stores, pharmacies, community centers. Integrated into community with inclusive opportunities. Near adult day programs, supported employment or therapy services, local access to social services, and close to organizations offering advocacy or peer groups. Is there room for a living caregiver if needed in the future? Is there the ability to retrofit, remodel needs as they evolve? Neighborhood is stable and long-term oriented, close enough for family visits or monitoring. All right, so like I mentioned before, I really like to get to know my clients and specifically what their needs are. And I want to know, what the entire process is like from the time they pull up into the driveway, and how do they get into the house, and what's the house like. So I've listed a couple of things here. What is the route from the van to the entryway? How accessible is the door or the entryway and the front door wide enough? What is flooring material like? Are there flooring transitions? Where is the main living space accessible to a mobilized wheelchair? Are there interior doors wide enough? Are there any transitions in the flooring? So these are all things we're looking at while we're touring a home. What is the route to the bathroom? Is the bathroom large enough to accommodate a motorized wheelchair? Does the shower provide enough space? What is the route between the bedroom and the bathroom? What is the route to the kitchen? Does the kitchen have enough space to accommodate a motorized wheelchair? What is accessibility to the backyard? What would be likely challenges to an emergency evacuation? I know everybody worries about costs a lot, and they tend to overlook some things. So I put together a list of what things to consider from a perspective, and understanding where the what the life cycle is of all these different components, and where the component is in that life cycle. Um, and the things we want to look at are the roof, gutters, exterior siding, doors, windows, weather stripping, fireplaces, chimneys, paint and caulking. So that's the most overlooked thing, is painting the exterior of your home. It's the first line of defense, and if everything's properly painted and caulked properly, definitely are protecting your siding much better, and therefore will have a longer life and less dry rot. You want to check out the garage door and the motor. How old's the appliances, how much, how long is your specific appliance life cycle for, and where is it in its life cycle? We want to document all of these things so that we know when they're going to have to be replaced. Not to forget the furnace, AC ducts, toilets, sinks, faucets, ceiling light fixtures and fans, light bulbs, doorbell, and security systems. Those are all things that we want to document, find out when they're installed, what their life cycle is, and when we can expect to replace them or repair them. Just did a quick thing on Bay Area building permits. Every project is different and it has its own elements, but I put together just a kind of overview of what, if you were to do a remodel on your home, or if you were going to build an ADU and a permit was required. This is a chart that kind of gives you an idea of how long things could take. The research and planning could take 2 to 4 weeks, 2 to 6 weeks for design, 4 to 12 weeks for plan review, revision, permit issuance up to a week, and construction inspections could be 2 to 8 months, depending on the scope of the project. Property tax assessment. So every time you pull a permit at the building department, you make an improvement to your home, you are due for a reassessment at the end of the completion of the project and after the permit is finalized.
Amy, we'll kind of get to what I call the most terrifying part of the program, which is, do we have any questions?
We do. Not too many, but we do have some questions. The first question was from a participant who asked the following question. I'm the trustee for the townhouse and a special needs trust my mother left for my 68-year-old sister. There's no money in the estate. Her only income is Social Security. The townhouse is getting run down, so we were thinking to sell the townhouse, have her go to an apartment and invest the proceeds to pay for that and upgrade her living situation. However, she is adamant that she does not want to move. What options do we have?
Let me answer this part. That is a tough situation here, because the problem is, and I maybe call on Beth. One of the things that Beth does here with us is she does a lot of the court accountings, and a lot of the cases you work on have to do with houses. And here's the problem, and this is why sometimes it's so hard for siblings to be the trustees, because the problem is, and we have cases where this happens, is if you keep writing this out, Beth, what's going to happen?
They're going to run out of money. And this is a townhouse, Amy? Are there HOA fees?
I don't know. We would have to let the participant answer.
Well, here's my thought. If the ownership requires that property be maintained, and it's not being the townhouse is not being maintained, then there will likely be penalties incurred, and the property either needs to be maintained as a trust asset, or the individual ends up frequently with nothing.
I have to say, we run into this quite often. If I didn't mention this, I think one of the worst experiences that we have as counsel for so many special needs trusts is we literally are involved in the literal eviction of several persons a year. It is not work of joy. And the sad thing with this is, quite frankly, that I don't have a good answer. The fact is that the property will need to be sold. And the goal, of course, is to retain as much as you can um, here to maintain as much as you can, because if the property wastes, that's the term we use in the law, to the point that it has no value, then quite frankly, we're facing some really dire situations. Could actually find yourself in a situation of an eviction here, and we've had that happen, and I've seen it tear families apart. I honestly wish that I had a great answer for this um, um, here. Sometimes hiring a care manager could be useful, but by the call of the question, I mean, I know this family member doesn't have a lot of resources.
Right. And similar to a care manager, I mean, I'm thinking almost a low-cost mediator. As strange as that sounds, I think it can be very helpful to have a neutral party involved in these discussions, so that it doesn't look like the family is being unreasonable with the individual.
Also, last thing on this, I mean, because we are short of time, is that if the person is developmentally disabled, this is a situation where you might want to call in, your regional center caseworker and call in the team on this. Now, our focus has been on developmental disabilities because there are so many services. It's not like it's a perfect system. The problem is, if we're dealing with somebody with a mental health issue or physical disability, there's nothing that compares to our regional center and that kind of thing. Once again, last thing here to the sister trustee, I know these things are really difficult, but despite the challenges, your sister's lucky to have you here, and all you can do is do the best you can. I mean, the only advice I would give to you, and I'm sure this is not what you want to hear, is to act sooner than later, because I don't think there's such a thing as an HOA without um, uh, dues and that kind of thing. And you're basically on a sinking ship here, and you need to get her off of that ship as soon as you can, and try to retain as much as you can, and use that to find her a decent situation. If you take that thing all the way down to zero, your options are going to be so limited. Amy, we need to sadly move on to the next question.
Okay. Can property be put in a special needs trust prior to death?
It can. Now, once again, Beth, the advantages there's two parts of this. You absolutely can put the house in a special needs trust. There's two kinds of special needs trusts you might put it in. One would be a revocable trust, and one would be an irrevocable trust. Typically, when you put it in a revocable trust, we have folks who do that. And for those of you that are clients, the vast majority of our trusts, we put together a revocable until the parent passes away, or whoever the grantor, the creator of the trust is. Now, so then you go down to, why do we make trust irrevocable? Okay, there's a couple of reasons. One is, when you pass away, or as Diana likes to call it, you're eaten by the dinosaur. So the folks that have been worked with Diana, you're used to that concept. Whatever you want to use here, it has to be irrevocable then, because you can't control it because you've passed away. But the other one is to transfer some sort of ownership to get a benefit out of it. So let's go back to what Beth had talked about, the problem is, especially with Prop 19, let's say you buy that property and you own it yourself for the use of your child, which is fine. But then when you pass away, that property's got to get reassessed at date of death value. Let's say you put it in the trust and make it irrevocable. At that point, you just gave up ownership, and now the ownership is in the name is based on the child. Okay. Now it's going to set a new property tax basis. But look at it this way. Let's say you've owned this thing for 5 years and it has a significant growth, but you're going to have a reassessment. Let's say you wait 30 years and it has a super significant growth, then the property tax change is going to be so high, in all likelihood, the property is going to have to be sold.
Mhm.
So this is something you look at, and this has been a major change since Prop 19, because once again, we've been urging families for years to, if you have the means, consider purchasing the home. But the Prop 19 and living in the parent's home has really changed the landscape out there, and it's something that where we need more thought.
Can a house in a living trust be transferred into a special needs trust?
A house in fact, the norm, if in my practice there is a norm, but if there's a norm, is that it's held by the parents and then transferred upon death here. And that's the norm. Normally it's from trust to trust. For
Okay.
those of you where this is a huge issue, this might be a time to take a look at the situation and reevaluate your options, because laws have changed, situations have changed, and you may want to change your strategy. I still feel that for the vast majority of the folks we serve, if you can maintain a home for the person with the disability, there's enough money for management, for upkeep, and property taxes. This could be a really great option depending on the beneficiary and the beneficiary's needs. Okay.
This one's pretty easy. What is the statutory site for the ADU laws cited?
Might be easy for you.
Oh.
It's easy for Beth because she's got it written down. Okay, so
Maybe you can type it into the chat.
well, possibly, but we'll get it. But Ron, maybe you can help us on this. My understanding is that there's a big move right now.
Yeah.
There's a big push for this, and there may be even some legislation coming up encouraging ADUs.
Yeah, there's a special bill 8 and a special bill 9 that talks specifically about ADUs and talks about the push for more housing.
Mhm.
By the way, I got a question for you, Beth.
Yes.
We're talking about an ADU, and the ADU is for the person with the disability. Could you do the same thing and have the person with the disability in the main house and move the parents into the ADU? Or okay,
And
Build yourself a new house.
it's, well, and if it's a multi-unit property, you can have multiple, potentially multiple ADUs.
Yes.
But it's a way for people to age in place.
the reason we're so gaga about ADUs is in some situations, not all, you get the best of all worlds in that your child is living in their own home, separate from the parents, and yet the parents or the family is still there. That's not ideal for everybody, but for a lot of folks, we're seeing more and more move towards that here. And so if that makes sense, it may be a good option.
And there's also some chatter that I've heard about the possibility in the future of being able to sell the single family residence and the ADU separately.
Really?
It's an escrow officer's worst nightmare, but
I bet so.
Interesting.
Amy.
Okay, my husband and I have placed our primary home into a special needs trust for our grandson upon our deaths. My question is, do we get the same deal through Prop 19 as parent to child? We will be doing grandparent to disabled child.
Yes. You do. the Proposition 19 carried over that part of Proposition 13.
Okay.
I pass.
Okay, the other questions are pretty specific and we can get back to them via email tomorrow.
Okay.
So I want to thank everybody for watching. I know did I mention that disability and simple are two words that don't go together? I think we kind of demonstrated that. And, for this, I mean, I think we could do this for a full day and not hit every aspect. The thing with this is that this is something that families should consider. It's not for everybody, and so there may be a lot of folks that are going to watch this that are going to dismiss it and say, hey, this is just not for me. But at least you explored the option. I think the real key out there is looking at the different options. And I will tell you from my experience as a former psych nurse, as a civil rights advocate, as an attorney, and just as a member of my community, secure, safe, appropriate housing is the foundation of successful community living. And if this is something that you have the means and the inclination to do, you can really enhance the quality of life for a person with disability. I just have to tell you, if this is not done correctly, if it's not funded properly, it can be an absolute nightmare here. So it's one of those things that there's a lot of reward, but there are some risks. I do want to mention one last thing, somewhat unrelated before we're done. We're recording this at the end of July in 2025. There are some major budget issues going on, as if anyone could ignore it. And so many of us have an advocacy. We're kind of worn out. I mean, it's like if I write one more letter to one more legislator, I think I'm going to scream. Well, maybe this is the time to scream, because I just want to tell you, we have some essential services like the ILS, like the SLS. And even before all these budget crises here, where we've had the shift of focusing on persons of need and that kind of thing to helping millionaires and billionaires here, as we're doing that, we need to come back to our core values, which is that persons with disabilities with the right supports can successfully live in the community, but it's not something that can easily be done alone. So this is the time more than ever before. You need to support your disability organizations. You need to make the needs of persons with disabilities here known. And this is so important, because deinstitutionalization is not just moving from institutions into the community and isolated group homes and that kind of thing. True community living is being part of the community, and hopefully what we've talked about today, if you can make this work, will help build a foundation for a person with a disability here for a quality of life. The other part of that is for those of us that are fortunate enough to be clients of the regional centers and that sort of thing. They need our support. They deserve our support. We all benefit, not just the persons with the disabilities, but it makes us all a more inclusive community. It makes us better people. I want to thank you tonight. Amy, thank you for watching out for us. Beth, thank you so much. You bring a wealth of practical knowledge to our law firm. You've become an essential part of the law firm, and housing is so important. And Ron, thank you for sharing your experience, not only as a real estate professional, but also as a contractor, and helping people think about what are the challenges with that. With that, thank you very much, and happy advocating.